Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we have finally gotten what we have all been waiting for.
Drop it like it's hot. Drop it like it's hot. Drop it like it's hot.
Happy Friday. Brian Manning here with the weekly update. Let's get right to it. It's going to be a little bit lengthy today. We have a lot to talk about. All great news. Super excited to talk with you today. So let's get right to it. Monday this week, relatively quiet news day. Not a lot to talk about there, along with Tuesday. Monday, Tuesday, we're really waiting in for Wednesday and the following days because that's when it really heats up. So Wednesday this week, we get ADP. So the beginning of every month, the first week, on the first Wednesday, we get the ADP report. ADP is the largest provider of private payrolls in the US. This gives us feedback on the employment numbers for the month before. So this is for the month of July. There was expectation that ADP had 150,000 jobs created for the month of July. ADP came out and said we had 122,000. So it was less jobs than were expected. We also got what's called the Employment Cost Index. So this was Alan Greenspan's favorite gauge of inflation in the US economy. And if we look at Q2, because this comes out on a quarterly basis, that's went from 1.1% down to being up 0.8%. So we saw a reduction in the Employment Cost Index, which is an inflation number that's moving lower. On a year-over-year basis, we had this number go from 4.3% down to 4.1%. So it just means that the employment costs are reducing across the country on a monthly, quarterly, and annual basis, which is a reduction in inflation. Again, this was Alan Greenspan's favorite gauge of inflation. We also had Jerome Powell speaking, the Federal Reserve wrapping up their meeting, press conference from Jerome Powell. None of us expected a rate cut here for the month of July, but he definitely sounded very dovish leading in for a rate cut coming up in September. And he basically said, barring no surprises, that September is going to be the month. So he already also really acknowledged that they're already currently very restrictive and that there's room for rate cuts. So if we look at this and we look at the cost of money, and we look at what's called the neutral interest rate, over time, we think there's room for about 2% in rate cuts. So he did also confirm that there likely would be a string of rate cuts. So we'll have to see what happens. The 2% of cuts would not happen very quickly, but over time, I believe that's really what we have availability for. Thursday this week is really relatively quiet, leading into today, the big day. Let's do a quick screen share. So first Friday of every month, we get BLS. We've talked about this for quite a long time. We've said for many, many, many months, and I actually have to give a big thanks to Barry and Dan Habib. That's who I follow for a lot of this information. They were really the first ones to tip us off, to really get us talking about this for many, many months, saying that inflation coming down for the Federal Reserve is likely not going to be the number that's going to cause mortgage rates to move lower or the Federal Reserve to cut rates. It's going to be unemployment, because something we're going to look at here in a minute, we'll talk more about inflation, but inflation has been moving down very slowly due to shelter costs. But the Federal Reserve has two mandates, right? That's a dual mandate for the Federal Reserve. Number one is price stability, so that's controlling inflation. Number two is gainful employment in the US economy, right? So if inflation is moving down slowly, but unemployment is rising rapidly, then they have to do something to really remove the restrictiveness of their monetary policy. So today, first Friday of every month, we get the BLS. This is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is their employment report. This is for the month of July. There was expectations in the month of July that we would have 175,000 to 185,000 jobs created. Well, shocking, for the first time we got accurate data and we had 114,000 jobs that were created. So definitely a big miss. Not only that, the prior 2 months were revised 29,000 lower. What's interesting is there's another model they look at for predicting employment. There's this what's called the birth-death model, which doesn't really carry a lot of weight right now because it's just not that accurate. Birth-death model said we had 246,000 jobs that were created, but when you compare that modeling to ADP said we were down 7,000. So not really sure how they're off by that much. But anyway, that's kind of thrown out the window right now because the primary number we're looking at is this 114. Now, where did these jobs come from? What's interesting is about 2/3 of these jobs came through government and healthcare. Well, no matter what happens economically, government and healthcare are always going to really be hiring people, right? So if we remove out government and healthcare, then the growth of the other jobs was not really all that robust. So if we look at this also, we also have what's called the household survey. So a household survey is when they call people across the country, they text them. I actually got this text back several months ago. It asked me a lot of questions. Am I currently employed? Am I unemployed? I was really surprised to get the text, and I thought it was really well thought out. Household survey, so 60,000 or so people across the country in the survey and some modeling there. That said, we only had 67,000 jobs that were created. Unbelievable. Then we look at the unemployment rate. So this is really the big mover. Unemployment rate moved from 4.1% up to 4.3%. A lot of the Federal Reserve members said they never expected to see unemployment get above 4.1. So we really thought if you saw unemployment go from 4.1 to 4.2, that would really be the catalyst for an upcoming rate cut. But here we are at 4.3%. So without a doubt, the Federal Reserve is looking at this because this is now above where any of them expected unemployment to be, which was at 4.2%. This is the highest number since October 2021, so we are seeing continued unemployment across the country. For inflation purposes, we look at hourly earnings. So hourly earnings tells us how much is our earnings going up on a monthly or an annual basis, right? So hourly earnings showed us that hourly earnings were only going up by 0.2%, and on a year-over-year basis, it lowered, right? So instead of going up at 3.8%, it went down to 3.6%. Weekly earnings also moved lower. Instead of growing at 3.5% on a year-over-year basis, they moved down to 3.3%. Average hours worked. So everything is moving lower. Inflation's moving lower. Our unemployment is increasing. Hourly earnings are reducing. So we're seeing everything we need for a rate cut here. What's also interesting for us to look at is going to be part-time work. So right now, 346,000 people say they have part-time jobs for economic purposes. That really means if you're struggling economically and you need to bring more money into your household, you're going to take a part-time job. So there's a lot of people across the country right now that have part-time jobs just to help get ends to meet in their household. And then 51,000 people said that they can only find a part-time job. So these are people that really want to get a full-time job, but unfortunately only a part-time job is available for them. Also, we want to look at inflation. So something we really watched is called Trueflation. I think Trueflation looks at like 20 million data points. It's a very accurate number. So right now, Trueflation says that our inflation rate is going up at 1.5%. The Federal Reserve wants to see us at 2%. So if you really look at Trueflation, we're already well below what the Federal Reserve wants. What's holding us, though, unfortunately, is these shelter costs. So CPI has shelter going up at 5.2%. PCE has shelter going up at 5.4%. These are really big numbers. If you look at Trueflation would tell us that rents are going down at 0.1%. But if you look at CPI, it says it's going up at 5.1, and PCE says it's going up at 5.1. So all of the government report numbers that we're looking at in our inflation numbers are going up, at 5%. Whereas you look at the true numbers in the marketplace, you're seeing rents going down by 0.1%. What's interesting is if we took our numbers and we replace these numbers, right? We replace the CPI shelter number and we replace the PCE shelter number. Right now, our inflation would be at 1.6% CPI and 1.9%. So what this really means is what we're actually feeling as consumers economically right now is inflation that is below the Federal Reserve's 2% target, but because shelter and these reports for the Federal Reserve lags by like 16 months, maybe even longer, we haven't seen the numbers come down there. But that's okay because the unemployment report is going to be the catalyst for rate cuts to see this going forward. I'm around all weekend. If you have any questions, let me know. If you're a realtor, keep an eye out for the upcoming classes that we have. We have one next week in Denver. We have a webinar the week after. Happy Friday. Have a great day.